It was Charles and Diana Part 2. We were expecting a new fairy tale.
It's probably quite weird for younger viewers to look back and think that Andrew and Fergie were ever really popular.
They're split in 1992. It was really the beginning of a very dramatic era.
It's just gone down and down and down, and it just didn't stop sliding.
The toe-sucking scandal, was this the moment modern royal tabloid culture really exploded?
Everything that stemmed from that marriage has come back to haunt this couple.
Welcome to Royal Exclusive Rewind, your look back at the triumphs, drama and defining moments in royal history. This week, we rewind back 40 years to summer 1986, when then Prince Andrew married Sarah Ferguson at Westminster Abbey, in what many hoped would be another royal fairy tale, just 5 years after Charles and Diana's wedding. The couple had quickly fallen in love, and within months, Fergie was swept into royal life. Watched by 500 million people worldwide, crowds packed London for the carriage procession, balcony kiss, and the moment Sarah became the Duchess of York. But the happy ending wouldn't last, unravelling into decades of tabloid turmoil that is still reverberating today. I'm Bronte Coy, and joining me to look back are former royal editor at The Sun, Charles Ray, and royal correspondent for Newsweek, Jack Royston. Hello, thank you for joining me.
Hello.
What was it like on the day, Charlie? Let's go right back to summer 1986. Was it Charles and Diana Part 2 at the time, or is the sequel just never as good?
No, I think it was Charles and Diana Part 2. I mean, I remember the day. It was a great day. You just mentioned there's 500 people around the world watching the thing. The crowds were jam-packed. You couldn't walk anywhere in London. I remember being at the end of it when they'd come back from the church, being on the balcony, and I was at what they call the cake thing that looks towards the palace, and there was the kiss, and Fergie did the ear. People were shouting, "Give it a kiss, give it a kiss," and we had it all. And of course, in that time, we were expecting a new fairy tale, but unfortunately, we all the fairy tales that we were expecting, disintegrated quite quickly, which was a great pity. I mean, one of the things I will say that one of the problems was, unlike Catherine and Meghan, that their passage into the royal family was much easier than it was for Diana and Fergie. They were very much not strictly totally outsiders, but they weren't insiders as such, and they weren't given the help and consideration that they should have been given, and they weren't helped by the respective husbands at that time, unlike William and latterly Harry.
And I mean, we as you've just discussed, it was a huge day, of
Sure.
course, for royal fans. People were packing the streets, but this wedding, unlike other royal weddings, and it's obviously been a dramatic few years for the Yorks, but this wedding hasn't remained in the public imagination as a fairy tale wedding as other royals' weddings have, Jack.
Yeah, exactly. So it's probably quite weird for younger viewers to look back and think that, Andrew and Fergie were ever really popular. But obviously they were. He was, at one point a Falklands hero. And, he was thought of as being this young, good-looking guy. Very weird to think that way now. But if you look at Fergie's journey, so different to Diana, where Diana is still this, cultural icon many years later. And I think that drives people being continued interest in her wedding. She also had that, incredible dress that really is one for the royal history books with the, incredibly long train. Diana did. And even though we know that the relationship was shattered, Diana is this kind of totemic figure to the point that people do still maintain an interest in all of her fashion down the years. There are so many reasons for people to love her. Fergie never really quite connected with people to the extent that Diana did. It's not that she wasn't popular. She had a period when she was, I think, very popular, but she didn't have that completely unique connection that Diana had. We will not know until, a couple of decades' time whether Meghan's wedding is looked back on with greater fondness than Fergie's. I think it probably will be, to be honest with you. But partly that's because Meghan and Harry are still together. I think with Fergie, she fell from grace within the monarchy. Philip hated her. She kind of fell from grace a bit with the public. If people, royal correspondent, our kind of cohort of people thought she was a bit bonkers, I think, and didn't, thought she was.
I was going to say, can you verify that? Yes.
Thought she was a liability, and then Andrew turned into, even before Epstein, he turns into a total liability, and so I think that even though the divorce of Charles and Diana was hugely damaging to Charles, Diana came out of it a hero to many people. And, even internationally, Americans look back with huge fondness on Diana. And actually, a very significant percentage of people have actually forgiven Charles too and are happy that he's with Camilla. Fergie and Andrew, it's just gone down and down and down, and it just didn't stop sliding. And that is the primary reason, I think.
And you've just mentioned Diana a few times there as well. Was she responsible for getting them together way back before
Well, she
they got
was.
married?
She actually introduced Fergie to Andrew at, it was a private, I can't even remember, was it skiing or was it something similar that she invited them both to? And they, both of them immediately hit it off. Now, they were only together for, 2 or 3 months before... it was let's get married and walk down the aisle.
Incredible to imagine a very short period of
well,
time.
yeah, but in saying that, I met my wife. We were together for started going out together for 3 months. We decided we were going to get married. This year we're celebrating 55 years. So the reverses can also work.
It can go very right or very wrong.
Yeah,
what we're seeing.
well, exactly. But it went very wrong because these are two characters who bring with them, and who did bring with them, a lot of baggage, and both of them were collecting baggage as the marriage was going on. I mean, Andrew was still a serving sailor, so he was off on his jaunts. She was ending up, being a harbour hussy, turning up at various ports that Andrew might arrive at, just to wave at him, and that didn't go down at all well. And then there was, of course, Jack's mentioned about the outfits that she was wearing. Well, they weren't the Diana outfits. I mean, and it did not go down well with the public.
Do you feel a bit sorry for her on that one though? All these years later,
The tabloids were pretty ruthless, especially back then. I was going to say, well, of course. So you've mentioned it was only 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
Were they? Do you think back then they really were deeply in love? Was it a real love story at that time?
Oh, I'd like to think that they were. I would hate to think that this was just a marriage of convenience at that time. I think there was some love there, and I think there was. Let's not forget as well that since the divorce, they actually lived together for a great many years, both at Sunning Hill and at Windsor. Okay, they may have had different wings of the house and everything else, but they did come together, and they do have 2 children together, of which we have to believe that there is some family routine that does go on, however zany it is.
Zany might be the word there, a very soft word for it. Jack, Sarah was very quick, as we've said, it was a whirlwind romance. We had the big wedding watched by hundreds of millions. She then was a member of the royal family and quite a high-profile one. Do you think that she was adequately prepared for that role?
I don't actually think it's possible to be adequately prepared for that role. Before Meghan and Harry's marriage, there was this idea that, it needed to be somebody who had a sense of what fame was going to be like. And so then Meghan seemed perfect because she'd been a famous actress. But no amount of fame really prepares you for royal fame, perhaps unless you're maybe, the biggest A-lister on planet Earth. But even then, the chances of that biggest A-lister winding up with a royal is probably relatively slim. Fergie was not it's not possible to be prepared for the level of intrusion into your private life and the specific details of first of all everything you've ever done prior to the relationship, because that's the first thing that comes out is everything that you've done before your royal relationship, but then also everything you do from that point is deeply scrutinized in every single detail, and the tiniest things that wouldn't make headlines for a celebrity make front pages for a royal family member. So it's not really possible to be prepared for it. But one thing that I think did make their relationship work in the early stages is that they're very similar. It's also probably the thing that tore them apart.
I was going to say.
Yeah, they're kind of both children, and they're probably both a little narcissistic, to be brutally honest about it. And so they both needed a kind of a rock to stabilise them, and instead they destabilised each other, I think. But obviously, Andrew's long periods away being a big factor too.
So after the birth of their two daughters, as you've mentioned, the princesses, things began to unravel and quite quickly. And now we do know how dramatic things got. But back then, what were those initial split moments like? What was it that was really just driving them apart at the beginning there?
I think possibly the fact that they weren't together. That's never good for a marriage if, husband and wife are separated for great periods of time. It's all very well going off on a royal trip or whatever, but, you come back together. But, they had their own friends, they had their own interests as well. And things that didn't help matters at all. It was her being in Saint-Tropez having her toes sucked. I mean,
that never helps a marriage.
That never helps. That never helps a marriage. And I have to say, I've often wanted to be. I wish if I had a magic wand, I'd love to have been at Balmoral on that morning that the papers arrived, and the Queen and Prince Philip first saw the pictures, because it must have gone down like a lead balloon. And that was the start of the Duke of Edinburgh saying, "That's it. I won't have anything at all to do with her." And the Queen wasn't as wasn't as brutal. I mean, she still had Fergie around. We used to say she was the outlaw in the outhouse at Wood Farm. She was there, or at Balmoral, somewhere that the Queen would actually go down and have tea with her. But the Duke of Edinburgh wouldn't have anything at all to do with her. So that none of that helped matters either. And of course you had. Both of them were philandering at that time as well, which again doesn't help a marriage.
Oh.
I think one thing that's quite interesting is that the very financial advisor who kissed or sucked her toes, John Bryan, has actually said more recently that to an undercover journalist who was secretly taping him, that he actually raised Beatrice and Eugenie. He claims. I mean, that he was drunk and he was trying to impress a young woman, but maybe he might have been exaggerating. But he said Andrew was not there, like he was absent so much.
But that is also John Bryan. John Bryan was also filled with his own self-importance and everything else.
Well, rightly as you bring up, that was such an infamous scandal.
Sure.
And their split in 1992 really set off, it was really the beginning of a very dramatic era across the board for the royals with the tabloids. Do you think that specific toe-sucking, we've said this a lot, the toe-sucking scandal, apologies to the viewers, so many times this will be conjured in your mind. The toe-sucking scandal, was this the moment modern royal tabloid culture really exploded, Jack?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was a front page of the Daily Mirror. I think it's probably gone down as one of their biggest front pages ever. I mean, they were hugely keen on the fact that they got that story. There were a number of other those very tabloidy type stories around at that time. Obviously, you've got the Charles and Camilla tampon tapes and Princess Diana's phone call with James Hewitt, which was recorded. It was it's crazy to think back on that time, the amount of information you got to find out. We've had our own high dramas in this era, which are also probably will be looked back on as completely extraordinary in their own very different way. But it was just the level of insight and access that was being given into the lives of these people is just absolutely off the chart.
I don't think you could get a bigger story than the breakup of the marriage of the future king and queen, to be perfectly honest. I mean, being a royal correspondent in those days, I can assure you, you were running around like a mad person. It was like you hit one wall, you get in another wall, then it was another. These stories were happening every day, and you had to keep on top of it. You never had any time yourself, just to sit down and think. So I don't think specifically the toe-sucking story was the straw that broke the camel's back, but it was just another one in a huge sequence of very, very big, major royal stories that are history-making.
Was this, in hindsight, the most significant modern royal marriage for the scandals that it has since unleashed, and particularly, I mean, in recent years?
I would say yes, because of what we now know, because we now know the links of the Epstein, the fact that Andrew is in trouble because he was an overseas ambassador. So everything that stemmed from that marriage has come back to haunt this couple in a huge manner, and will continue to do so for a great many years to come.
I would agree with that. I think that it's easy to miss in the Epstein files that actually a big part of the reason I think why Andrew continued his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein had been convicted was actually because he was trying to get Epstein to pay off Fergie's debts. So it really was both of them. And, in the early stages of this scandal and of this story, it was, the view was that it was Andrew and Epstein, and Fergie's role in it was massively misunderstood and diminished. But actually, she was very much a part of driving her husband, or her ex-husband, sorry, back to Epstein. And this police investigation into Andrew right now, she is the plan to try and get her debts paid off by Epstein is being talked about on the same email chains as the confidential trade documents that Andrew is accused of leaking to Epstein. There is clearly a link between those two things. It's for the police to explore and to determine whether any wrongdoing has taken place. But make no mistake, Fergie was a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is absolutely extraordinary to look back at this photo, for example, and see that day and think about the excitement and the press covering it and all of the things that were happening at the time to celebrate, and think about where we are today with all of the things that you've just mentioned especially. It has been a very, very wild ride when it comes to Sarah Ferguson and former Prince Andrew. So thank you so much for looking back on that
Pleasure.
day and everything that's unfolded since. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That's all we've got time for on this week's Royal Exclusive Rewind. My thanks to my guests, Charlie and Jack, and to you for watching. Join us next time as we dive back into the Royal Archives to relive another unforgettable moment from royal history.